Hello, welcome back to our verse by verse study on the book of First John. Such a great book, tells us so much about the person and the work of Jesus Christ to bring us salvation by faith alone in his death and resurrection. Also tells us measures that we can use to assure ourselves that indeed we are Christians. And these are generally, as we've spoken about these, often between chapters 2 and 4, that those who are generally obedient, even though we all sin on occasion, and First John recognizes this in chapter 2, verse 1, that we are loving one another in a giving love and have a proper doctrine towards the person and work of Christ, then that gives us confidence that we are saved by faith, because God has effected these changes in us by making us a new person that does and believes these three measures. This is very important. So we're in chapter 5 today, verses 11 and 12, and we are moving towards the theme verse of the book in verse 13. So in context, these two verses, in working up to verse 13, move from the testimony that God gave towards Christ while he was on earth, his baptism, the coming of the Spirit, and his death on the cross, and that this record was true. And so he begins in verse 11 in the King James that this is the record, and this is the word testimony in the original Greek, that God hath given us eternal life. And this life is in his Son. He that has the Son has life. He that has not the Son of God has not life. Okay, so what does this mean? How does it fit in context? So that testimony that God gave through the baptism and the Spirit and his death, also you remember perhaps from chapter 1 that he gave the testimony to Christ while he was here on earth, who gave it to the disciples, that gave it to the readers of the letter, the recipients. But chapter 5 goes further and says this testimony from God is greater than that of man, and tells us that salvation is true and Christ's work is true. So if you believe this record or of what God did, and you believed on it by faith alone in the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, so this comes from other verses like Romans 10, verse 9, Ephesians 2, verses 8 and 9, that God hath given us eternal life, and the life is in his Son. So God has provided for the provision of his Son and his sacrificial work and resurrection that we might be saved. It's something that he did, not us. In verse 12, if you have the Son, you have life. Now, how do we have the Son? Well, we know after Christ's resurrection, he ascended into heaven, and this is recorded in Acts 1, and sits at the right hand of God the Father, Hebrews 8:1. So from there, he leads the church, Colossians 1, and ministers to us. So how do we have him? Well, as we've talked about throughout the book, and really all the apostolic epistles or letters talk about this. Those who have believed are changed. They're a new person. John speaks in the epistle of First John of the unction of the seed. And here he says, having Christ, because you have Christ, because you've been regenerated, as Paul says, into a new person that's in the image of Christ. Colossians 3:10. So that person then is able to obey and love and believe as these measures in the prior chapters tell us, or and they examine us, and we're able to answer in the affirmative because we have Christ. We have this regeneration. So if a person doesn't have the Son, is not remade into his image, he doesn't have the life. It's black and white. It's either Yes or no? You believe by faith and are a new person. A person who hasn't then believed on faith is not regenerated and does not have that life. There's nothing in between. There's nothing gray. Okay, important verses. Thank you for joining me today. We will get to the theme verse 13 next time. I hope you'll join me then. I'll look forward to seeing you. Goodbye for now.